I realize if I was Tommy right now, I'd be entering a minefield territory, okay? And I'm about to talk about something political. And I had a guy on my Discord last week. He liked to say the word Aryan every other word. And he liked to talk about globalists, in brackets, part of a banking conspiracy. And he wasn't shy about it. And I was fascinated in him because I wanted to talk to him and understand his point of view and the reason why he saw the world the way he did. So I wanted to talk to him. I was really interested. I wanted to pick his brain, you know what I mean? He accused me quite frequently of not reading enough. And I couldn't quite understand this concept of reading. So if you read Wikipedia, that's not real reading. If you read any news outlet, any kind, even the small bloggers or the big mainstream media, that's not reading either. But when you read about a 1940s or 1930s ideological person, you getting me? And there were many of them back then, popular era for certain ideologies, that apparently is proper reading. I thought it was really interesting is what he would consider as big brain reading and what was considered not appropriate reading material. Because there's almost a strange fascination with reading books and being that's the big brain thing to do, but anything else you read, that's bad and evil. But he linked me all these people who were his idols, and they were all dead, and they were all fucking extreme political people, almost philosophers / ideological people. The people on the far left constantly talk about Marx and how you should read Marx to fully understand communism, and the people on the far right are constantly talking about these far right fascist philosophers. You need to read their books and understand them. But the problem is if you only read their books and that's the only point of view that you're getting, I feel like you're getting a really screwed view of the world. You know, I just thought it was kind of interesting. I don't know, he was all big brain about read books, and then he links me all the books he's read, and they're all far right ideologues, you know what I mean? Demagogues, you know? This is the truth. Sorry, I'll summarize everything I've just said right now, because I obviously feel like I'm vouching for one side or the other. If you're ever going to have an opinion about some autocrat or ideologue or demagogue, it might be a better idea not to read just specifically that area of expertise. You might want to read the extremes on both sides. You want to read something in the middle. You want to read things that critique them. You know, the only way you can have a good textured opinion and different flavors of the world is if you definitely listen to things that you agree with and what you disagree with and try and have every area of the spectrum. Yeah, the only really way that you can have a balanced opinion is by reading different views or different points of view. But the truth is that's really difficult to do anyway, because there's so many different... You can't really sit down and read tons of books on someone agreeing and disagreeing with something, because it's kind of difficult to digest all in one go. I think the biggest issue sometimes with politics is I don't think a lot of people get it. And that's all right. There's a lot of things in this world I don't get. I don't understand quantum physics. I don't understand fucking nuclear fusion. I don't understand this shit. But the truth is you don't call something dumb because you don't understand it. You know what I mean? Come on, guys. Big brain. I think the less you know about politics, the more that you tend to veer towards the extremes. And I think one thing I've noticed quite frequently online, people who pretend that they're in the Overton window. Let's actually teach you guys. Let's learn a little bit about the Overton window. First thing, disclaimer time. This varies from country to country. It isn't universal throughout the entirety of the world. The Overton window is a way of explaining what politics are radical, extreme, and what are politically palatable. The centrist New Party of New Zealand. I really hope they're not an extreme group. Okay, we'll use this one because it's not got a name on it. There we go. There we go. Problem solved. All right, so here we go. So we'll use this to represent the left or right. Okay, so you have the left here and you have the right here, okay? And what basically is it represents the center left in your country and the center right. So in America, it would be the Republicans and the Democrats. I understand America's system is very complex, and I understand that there are some extreme people in either parties that could exist as well. I understand that. But generally, to be palatable and votable and electable, they need to be within the Overton window. Because otherwise, if they appear extreme, not only will they be casted out by their voters, but they could be casted out by their individual party. So change generally in democracy is quite slow, because everything, for the most part, has to stay inside of the Overton window. Now, you could argue, for instance, that Trump, for instance, moved really close to the edge of the Overton window, because he was probably the furthest that the Republican Party had gone in recent times. Just an example. We're not trying to take sides here, guys. We're just trying to say where these political candidates would sit on the Overton window scale. Now, the problem is if you start to preach politics that are outside of your country's Overton window, as I said to you before, I'll say it again, the Overton window moves depending on what country you live in. Because, of course, something could appear extreme in one country and could appear moderate in another country. For instance, universal healthcare. In America, it could appear outside of the Overton window. In Europe, for instance, universal healthcare. So anyway, what do we learn from this? So we learn basically the more you try and move out of the Overton window, the less electable you become. So there is a reason why no one is willing to take a very radical stance, particularly in an election cycle, because they will not be voted in, so therefore they'll more than likely be cast out and probably never see the light of day ever again. Hence the reason why in most democracies you end up with more of a two-party system, with two parties dominating the political sphere, because they generally represent the left and represent the right of that political sphere. Or there might be a third term, I don't want to get too complicated, but it's called Big Tent, or the third way, where they'll try and represent the center and try and catch as much from the left and the right, which are politically palatable. I want to like paint this in a way that I feel like I'm being completely as impartial as possible without kind of like hanging myself, you know what I mean? So I'm trying my absolute best. So the less you know about politics, one of the problems you run into is you tend to latch onto the extremes of the left and right. Everyone has, for instance, had a friend who's on the far left, and they'll say something like capitalism needs to be abolished, the structures are all set up and rigged, the banks have all the money, have all the control, and have all the power. And then someone on the right will say this is a global conspiracy. Ethnic groups are the reason why people can't live together in homogenous groups, therefore it's causing all the problems of society. These opinions are both incredibly extreme, and if a political party were to latch onto one of these political positions, then they would not get voted in. So I think what tends to happen is the more that you tend to learn about politics, the more you do tend to drift towards the center and then become more electable in the center. It represents how Overton windows do swing in certain countries. It kind of represents the country as a whole in a weird way, because you'll see similarities between the Scandinavian countries and New Zealand, where they more lean overall, their Overton window is slightly more to the left. Maybe Brazil, they've leaned slightly more to the right, and maybe under the Republican era, under Trump, you should have said the Overton window could have swung a little bit more to the right. I think the problem with political compass tests is that politics is too complex to be just defined on a set spectrum, and I don't think it's a really good idea to use them. I don't think they're really good. And I think the problem is people tend to use them when they want to be inside of a camp. So like, I want to be recognized by my set group that I love and I enjoy, so therefore I'll do a political compass test to represent who I am. I will say though, there's quite a few people that call themselves center left or center right, and then when you dig more into their politics, they're not actually center or left or center right. They do tend to push outside of the Overton window. So an example would be a more of a far right position would be, you think the Frankfurt School is indoctrinating society to make it more progressive, SJW, and poisoning the minds of everyone. That would be more towards a further right Overton window political stance. Landlord is, oh yeah, fuck yeah, that's really bad. The idea of abolishing landlords. Fuck, it's really far left that though, isn't it? It's like the idea of abolishing different institutions of capitalism. I think the truth is, if you're doing political compass tests, I think what you're doing is you're trying to put yourself into a set group or a set bubble to try and get approval from your peers. I think politics is quite complex. At the end of the day, smart people talk about policies. Smart people talk about policies. What is your stance on this policy? Why do you believe that policy? What do you think is best for society as a whole? These are good questions. Now, bad questions are, what is your ideology? I'm a social democrat. I'm an authoritarian democrat. These labels not only are shit, because a lot of the time you may not agree with them 100%. Two, they're constantly always moving. Things are always moving forward and evolving. So the truth is, those set specific labels don't represent anything. Well, I think it's quite easy to look up to leaders, because I think a lot of people, this is going to hit a sore point for a few people, a lot of people are looking for internet daddies. And I think sometimes a very charismatic leader can represent their internet daddy, internet leader, or political daddy. Therefore, they look up to this specific set individual. And the truth is, they're not really following them because of their politics. I guess they involve their politics in their life somewhat to a certain degree, but for the most part, it's just that they almost looking for a role model as such. I do feel like a lot about monarchists, you know. They're all looking for like a supreme monarchist daddy wearing a big crown. Authoritarian vegan. I am now will be known as the authoritarian vegan. Feedback gaming. This video technically is part 2.